Hi, I'm Emma. Welcome to Hidden Finance. If you're earning more than ever but still feel like you're standing still, you're not alone. Here, we uncover the quiet systems shaping your money, income traps, rising costs, lifestyle inflation, and the hidden psychology that keeps even high earners feeling stuck. No hype, no shortcuts, just clear thinking and practical strategies that actually move the needle. If you're ready to stop reacting to money and start directing it, this is where we begin. There is a kind of person who walks through life carrying invisible weight. Not the kind that shows up on a bank statement, but the kind that lingers quietly in the mind. They wake up, check their balance, scroll through polished lives on social media, and feel behind. Not dramatically behind, just enough to question everything. They are what we might call the prisoner of appearances. They don't necessarily spend recklessly. In fact, they often believe they're being responsible. A better apartment because it feels deserved. A newer phone because it's time. Occasional dinners, trips, upgrades, small decisions that seem harmless in isolation. Yet, stitched together over time, they form something heavier. A life that costs just a little more than it should. And the strange part is, it doesn't feel like a problem at first. It feels like progress. From the outside, everything looks fine, sometimes even impressive. But internally, there is a quiet tension, a subtle calculation happening behind every choice, a background noise that never fully turns off. Can I afford this? Will this stretch me too thin? Why does it still feel tight even after earning more? This is where the illusion becomes dangerous, because the world teaches that wealth is visible. It must be seen, displayed, proven. But what if that belief itself is the trap? What if the very things that signal success are the same things quietly preventing it? There is another character moving through the same world at the same time, someone far less noticeable. No dramatic upgrades, no sudden lifestyle leaps, just a series of decisions that seem almost boring. They are the quiet builder. While others chase the feeling of arrival, this person is quietly creating distance between what they earn and what they spend. Not through extreme sacrifice, but through intention. They don't buy to impress. They don't upgrade to keep pace. They choose, and more importantly, they decline. And that gap, small at first, begins to grow. It doesn't look like much. It doesn't feel like much. There are no celebrations, no external validation, just a quiet accumulation of space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to not panic when life inevitably shifts. But here's the unsettling truth. Most people would rather look like they're moving forward than actually be moving forward. Because real progress is subtle. It doesn't trigger applause. It often feels like standing still or even falling behind. And so a question begins to surface beneath all of this. If the life that looks successful still feels fragile, then what does real stability actually feel like? At some point, something shifts, not dramatically, but quietly, almost imperceptibly. It doesn't come from a sudden windfall or a lucky break. It comes from noticing patterns, the same choices repeating, the same outcomes returning, the same feeling of effort without real progress. This is where the observer emerges. The observer begins to see what others overlook, that wealth is not built in moments of excitement, but in moments of restraint, that the real game is not about earning more quickly, but about thinking differently over time. And perhaps the most uncomfortable realization is this. We often don't struggle because we lack money. We struggle because we misunderstand time. There are two timelines running in parallel. One is fast, visible, and addictive. It rewards immediacy. Buy now, upgrade now, feel better now. It's the timeline of instant gratification, the one most people live inside without questioning. The other is slow, almost invisible. It rewards consistency, repetition, patience. It asks for decisions that feel insignificant today, but compound quietly in the background. This is where the idea of growth begins to transform, not as something explosive, but as something accumulative. A small gap between income and spending doesn't feel powerful today. Investing a fixed amount each month doesn't feel impressive. Ignoring short-term opportunities doesn't feel exciting. But over years, decades even, these choices begin to behave differently. They multiply, not in a dramatic overnight way, but in a steady, almost stubborn way, like a force that doesn't need attention to keep working. And this is where most people step out of the game too early. They chase the visible path, the quick wins, the stories that sound impressive in the moment, but they never stay long enough in one direction to let time do its work. Meanwhile, the quiet builder continues. No urgency, no noise, just repetition. And slowly, something unexpected happens. Money stops being the center of every decision, not because there is suddenly an abundance, but because there is structure. Systems begin to replace constant thinking. Decisions become less emotional, more intentional. The mental weight starts to lift. This is the first real sign of change, not in the bank account, but in the mind. Because when money no longer dominates every thought, something else becomes possible: clarity. And with clarity comes a different kind of question. If wealth isn't about having more, could it actually be about needing less than we once believed? There is a moment that doesn't announce itself, but quietly redraws everything. It often begins with something small, a raise that arrives, and for the first time, nothing changes. No sudden upgrade, no urgent need to celebrate with a purchase. Just a pause. This is where the breaker of patterns is born. For years, income and lifestyle moved together, almost automatically. Earn more, spend more. Progress measured by visible upgrades. But now, that pattern begins to loosen, not because of discipline alone, but because something deeper has shifted. The definition of enough is no longer borrowed from the outside world. It becomes internal. And that changes everything. Because once enough is defined, the noise starts to fade. The endless comparisons lose their grip. The urge to match others, colleagues, friends, online, begins to feel irrelevant. It's not that desire disappears, it's that it becomes quieter, more selective. We begin to notice how often spending is not about need, but about emotion, about validation, about keeping up with a version of life that was never truly ours. And slowly, almost unexpectedly, a new kind of freedom appears. Not the freedom of abundance, but the freedom of non-reaction. A friend buys something expensive, there is no urgency to follow. An advertisement promises a better life. It feels less convincing. A trend rises, peaks, and fades. It passes without pulling us in. This is where the internal upgrade becomes visible, not through what is added, but through what is no longer required. And at the same time, another layer begins to form beneath the surface, a buffer. Not just money sitting in an account, but something more psychological, a sense that unexpected events no longer carry the same weight. A broken device, an urgent expense, a sudden change, these no longer feel like threats. They feel like interruptions, manageable ones. And that quiet stability begins to influence decisions in ways that are easy to miss. Choices become less rushed, less reactive, more deliberate. We start saying no, not out of restriction, but out of clarity. No to things that drain. No to things that don't align. no to things that once felt necessary but now feel optional. And here is the subtle truth that most people overlook. The more we control our reactions, the less the world controls our finances. Because it was never just about income, it was about impulses, about timing, about the invisible pressure to act before thinking. And once that pressure weakens, something unexpected happens. Time begins to feel different. Not faster, not slower, just more spacious. Which leads to a question that few stop to ask. If money can create space, then what is that space actually meant to be used for? There comes a stage where the pursuit itself changes. At the beginning, money feels like the goal. Then it becomes security. But eventually, it transforms into something far less obvious. It becomes time. Not in the abstract sense, but in the way a day feels, the way mornings begin without urgency, the way decisions are no longer compressed by pressure, the way life starts to open rather than tighten. This is where the architect of time emerges. Not someone who has unlimited resources, but someone who has learned to direct them intentionally. They begin to notice a quiet trade happening beneath every decision. Money can be exchanged for convenience, for rest, for focus, for moments that would otherwise be consumed by obligation. And for the first time, spending is no longer just about acquiring things. It becomes about reclaiming time. A few hours saved here, a responsibility delegated there, small adjustments that, over time, reshape the rhythm of life itself. And yet, the most profound shift isn't external. It's in ownership. The language changes. Not, I can't afford that, but that's not where I choose to put my energy right now. Not, life is expensive, but this is how I've decided to live within it. There is no denial of reality. Costs exist. Constraints are real. But they are no longer excuses. They are variables to work with, not walls to hide behind. And this is where everything converges. Because wealth, in its quietest form, is not built on perfect conditions. It is built on consistent ownership. Ownership of choices, ownership of priorities, ownership of direction. And over time, something remarkable takes shape. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden arrival, but a life that feels stable. A life where decisions are intentional, not reactive, where time is valued more than appearances, where money supports life instead of controlling it. And perhaps the most surprising part is this. From the outside, it may not look extraordinary. No flashy signals, no obvious markers. But internally, it feels completely different. Calmer, clearer, lighter. And so the final realization gently settles in. If real wealth is this quiet, how many people are chasing noise while standing right next to what they've been looking for all along? There is a final stage that doesn't feel like an ending, but more like a soft arrival. Not the kind marked by a number in a bank account or a milestone others can recognize, but something far more subtle, something internal. This is where the silent owner begins to exist. Life from the outside still looks ordinary. The same routines, the same environments. No dramatic shifts that signal something has changed. But internally, everything has. Decisions no longer carry the same emotional weight. There is less urgency, less pressure to prove, less need to react. Because the foundation is already there. It was built slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. And this is where the biggest misconception about wealth finally dissolves. We often imagine that one day everything will feel different, that there will be a clear moment, a notification, a breakthrough, a visible transformation that confirms it. But the truth is far less cinematic. There is no single moment, there's only a gradual shift until one day the anxiety that once felt constant is no longer present. The need to check balances, compare lifestyles, justify decisions, it fades into the background. And in its place, something else appears, a sense of steadiness. Not excitement, not even happiness in the way most people expect, just calm. And that calm begins to influence everything. Time feels less rushed, choices feel less heavy, even uncertainty feels manageable, because the fear of what if something goes wrong no longer dominates the mind. There is space, and in that space, something unexpected begins to grow: awareness. We start to see how much of life was once driven by noise, external expectations, invisible pressures, stories about what success should look like, and we begin to question them. Not aggressively, not rebelliously, just quietly. Do these things actually matter? Were they ever necessary? Or were they simply inherited beliefs, passed down and repeated without reflection? And with each question, another layer falls away, until what remains is surprisingly simple: a life built on intention. Not perfection, not optimization, just clarity. Money is still there, but it is no longer the center. It becomes a tool, a support, something that works in the background rather than something that constantly demands attention. And perhaps the most profound shift of all is this: there is no longer a need to feel rich, because the life itself begins to feel sufficient, not lacking, not excessive, just aligned. And that alignment changes how everything is experienced. Work becomes a choice, not just an obligation. Time becomes something to shape, not just to fill. Decisions become reflections of values, not reactions to pressure. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new definition of wealth takes root. Not accumulation, but as autonomy, the ability to decide, to pause, to step away, to say no without fear, and yes without hesitation. And this is where the journey quietly completes itself, because the goal was never just money, it was always about what money makes possible. And when that becomes clear, one final question remains, perhaps the most important one of all. If this quiet version of wealth has been within reach all along, then what has truly been holding us back from living it sooner?